Kim, tell us what is on your radar today.
Well, it seems to still be extremely difficult for us to get any real reporting on the war in Ukraine. The only thing we keep hearing in our news is Russia is being pummeled, and any day now they're going to run out of supplies, give up, and go home. If you remember, there have been numerous reports coming out, like this one from Newsweek on March 15th, claiming Russia was mere days away from running out of resources. Or like this report from the Daily Mail 2 weeks later saying essentially the same thing, that Russia's war effort had stalled because the Red Army couldn't get supplies. Well, we've been unable to get a clear picture of what exactly is going on in Ukraine. All of the reporting has been, quite frankly, piss poor. An important figure, like how many casualties have occurred on either side, is still nearly completely unknown to us. For example, estimates of Ukrainian civilians killed run somewhere between 3,800 and 25,000. That's an enormous difference. Same when it comes to estimates of troops killed. The Ukrainian government claims their military losses are somewhere around 3,000. The U.S. puts that estimate somewhere closer to 11,000. The estimates aren't any better when looking at Russian casualties. Russia claims they've lost about 1,500 troops, but the U.S. claims that figure is in the tens of thousands, even upwards to 60,000 troops lost by some estimates. Basically, it feels like pick a number, any number, somewhere between 1,000 and 100,000, and it might be right. Now, I understand things change in war moment to moment, and people are being unfortunately killed all the time. But this range in casualty numbers, especially troop casualties, is absurd. These soldiers are all accounted for. The military knows who's in each battalion. They know their names. They've given them numbers. And they know who doesn't make it at the end of each day. They know if it's 100 soldiers who don't make it or if it's 1,000 soldiers who don't make it. So why the wild estimates? Now, when it comes to how much territory has been successfully defended by Ukraine or lost to Russia, we're still very much in the dark as well. We get the runaround in reports, and at times they even flat out insult our intelligence. Just these past few days, Melitopol fell to Russian control. The city had been mostly under Russian control, minus a steel plant that was still under the control of the Azov battalion. The battalion had been in pretty bad shape, but they were under orders not to surrender until the other day when they finally were allowed to. Now, rather than report the reality that Russia has captured Melitopol and hundreds of Azov battalion fighters have surrendered, the media gave us headlines like these. Breaking news, Ukraine ended its combat mission in Melitopol and said fighters were being evacuated, signaling that the battle at a steel plant was over. Or like this headline here, Ukraine says Melitopol steel plant combat mission completed as hundreds of troops evacuated. These headlines make it sound like Ukraine had come in, gotten their men out when the exact opposite happened. The fighters surrendered. The Russians rounded up the fighters and transported them to Russian-controlled territory where they're now being held as POWs. And Melitopol is under full Russian control, likely never to be considered part of Ukraine again. Now, why can't we just be told the truth? I think that's the ultimate big question. With all of the fighting against misinformation, why are we being fed a diet full of it when it comes to the war in Ukraine? What are they afraid of if we know all the details, the wins, the losses, the triumphs, the tragedies? What is the problem with us knowing all the details? So I want to show you this clip of Mick Wallace addressing the European Parliament, which he is a member of. Now, Mick is an Irish politician who's part of the left-wing political coalition. And unlike many on the left here in the U.S., in Europe, the left-wing politicians actually call for an end to the war through peace talks and often call out the establishment lies we, the people, are being fed. Here he is talking about U.S. journalist Seth Harp, who has reported that it's impossible to get factual information out of Ukraine.
Thanks very much, President. Russia engages in disinformation and propaganda. So does everybody else. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on the comments of the US investigative reporter, Seth Harp, who recently got back from spending a month in Ukraine for Harper's Magazine in the US. He was conducting research and has been doing some interviews, and his experience is striking, if only for the limitation and obstacles he faced in trying to cover the war. Speaking about access for journalists in Ukraine, he said, "No one is able to visit the front lines. No one is doing interviews with commanders. No one is going to the field hospitals. There aren't good casualty numbers." And it slowly dawned on me, he said, that it's just a result of the extraordinary, restrictive, immediate environment that's over there. It's much more restricted than in any war zone I've ever worked in, he said. He described the media centres that had been set up by the Ministry of Defence over there, how streamlined and comfortable, he said, they were for Western reporters. But he says it's almost impossible to get information that doesn't come through the centralised channel. So there's a great deal of homogeneity in the reports that are coming out of Ukraine, largely because reporters are just going and hanging out at these centres and they're all getting the same material. Now, what's clear is that the narrative about the Ukraine war is tightly controlled by the Ukraine Ministry of Defence, and with all the checkpoints, it's impossible for journalists to gain access to anything resembling the front unless with full approval of the ministry. Anything that deviates from the narrative that comes out of this highly choreographed show is condemned as Russian disinformation, when in fact what I am describing is a smoothly running propaganda machine, policing the narrative so as to suit the NATO-Ukraine perspective. The one-dimensional approach is at the expense of possibly reaching a genuine understanding of what's really going on.
Yeah, so we don't really know what is going on. And Robbie and Bree, you know, the big question that I have is why are they not allowing us to know the truth? Why is it that journalists in Ukraine are unable to get to the front lines or to talk to commanders? We have one guy that's on YouTube, Patrick Lancaster, and the people that he's with. He's been on the front lines in Mariupol. Watching his videos are harrowing. But other than him, who's actually there, and you can see him interviewing people in Mariupol. Now that was he was alongside Russian fighters, interviewing people in Mariupol. They gave a very anti-Ukraine perspective on that, but it was at least, but he was talking to people. He was walking up to them. You could actually hear the interviews and hear their responses. That was better than what we're getting out of mainstream media. So I think, one big question a lot of us have is, why can we not get accurate information coming out of that war? What is it that they don't want us to know, and why do you think that is?
Yeah, I thought it was very telling, and you were right to point it out, how the New York Times and other news outlets described what was happening in the resolution to Mariupol, which was a defeat for those Ukrainian aligned forces. But they said in the headline, right, Ukraine says they've withdrawn the force. Well, okay, right. Sure, that's a factual. Ukraine did say that. But is what they said true? Just because they said it doesn't mean it's written. Like, not to tie this back to anything else, but I noticed that when I was, criticizing this disinformation board guy, and like the mainstream reporting is, well, DHS said this was bad faith.
Yeah, okay, right. The government stuff.
Right. The government said that, but that doesn't mean it's true. And that's a universal case for our government, for the Russian government, the Ukrainian government. But there's a kind of, I think, because the mainstream media says, well, right now, because of the composition of our government, the mainstream media views the Biden administration favorably as like a home team kind of scenario that now extends to the Ukrainian government, given just the reality of our bifurcated politics. So if it's them, then it's, well, yeah, this is what they said, so we're not going to question that because it's what our people said, which is very unhealthy.
Yeah, it was literally what ex-intelligence agencies say that Hunter Biden tape is likely Russian disinformation. It's the same kind of headline we see over and over again. And I think, to your initial question, part of the issue is that we do have this crisis in media, where there are fewer and fewer outlets that have the resources to send people into these kinds of situations. Per your excellent segment, so many folks who are in those situations know each other from these legacy media institutions. They corral in the same place. They're talking to the same people. They're getting the same story, because there's no real incentive to be the breakout when there's basically a monopoly on the news, and everyone's going to come to your 2 or 3 or 4 big sources anyhow. The idea of this intrepid reporter who is out there putting themselves on the line or trying to get a different kind of take, there's diminishing returns for that kind of investigative reporting, and it all comes from this fundamental funding crisis where there's no news anymore outside of the corporate news in large part.
Yeah, Patrick Lancaster has been completely smeared as, a Russian agent. He is with the Russian fighters, documenting it and documenting the battle in Mariupol. But, yeah, you're right. It's diminishing returns for him when he's just labeled, and then will he even be welcome back in the United States when this is over? I don't know, but I think he lives over there, so I don't know if he even plans on coming back at all, but I'm sure he would like to come home to visit family or something along those lines. But, other things that Seth Harp, so he's really interesting, and at some point maybe we should get him on the show, but he talked about how even the idea of this big foreign legion. So when he was over there, he was investigating whether or not there's this 20,000 strong foreign legion. You know, we've been hearing about this in the news, that all these foreign fighters coming and helping Ukraine. And he says it doesn't exist. It's totally made up. I mean, it's just 100% made up. And he says even the New York Times, when they tried to do a piece on this foreign legion, they said, you know, one thing to note in the reporting when they were talking about it, one thing to note, we didn't actually identify or find any of these people.
Well, what about, Malcolm Nance? No, but Malcolm Nance is there. Are you kidding? I mean, he has the strength of 10. My God.
That's true. That's true. I mean, you know, you're right, Malcolm Nance, by all means. But, you know, it's insane that we're not getting this actual information, the reality. And they're saying, you know, Russia's being pummeled. Russia has been gaining more and more ground. They nearly have completed what they said that they were going to do, which was capture Donbas and the whole of Donbas and also create a land bridge to Crimea. They're nearly done. They have, there's one area of the Donbas in the Donetsk region that they still haven't captured yet. And from the reports is that they're gearing up, that they're rallying their troops, getting them ready for a big battle to capture the rest of that Donetsk region in the Donbas. Once they do that, they have literally accomplished what they claimed that they were going to do in Ukraine. Now, whether they go beyond that and if they want to go and try to capture, let's say, Odessa, or if they want to get more Ukrainian land, that is yet to be seen. But as far as what they said their goal is for this special operation, they're nearly completed. But we're not even getting that information. Instead, we just keep hearing over and over since the middle of March. How long has it been now? Since 3 days till Russia runs out of supplies. You know, it's like 2 weeks to stop the spread. 3 days and Russia's over. 3 days and they're going to pack it up and go home. That hasn't actually happened. Are they lying to us because they want us to continue supporting the billions of dollars that are being sent over there? Do you think that's why they're lying to us? Or, I mean, are they just wanting to insult our intelligence by saying things like, you know, in the news, even when they were talking about the fall of Melitopol, they said things like the soldiers were being evacuated on buses emblazoned with Z. You mean Russian buses? Like, just say Russian buses. Mm-hmm. Don't say buses with Z's on them. Yeah. Well, we know.
I think it's a mixture of kind of naivety, media commenters not actually being on the ground, not knowing what's going on, and not wanting to admit that the very rosy, cheery picture in the beginning that, oh yeah, they're really, they're getting stopped in their tracks. This is too costly for Russia. They don't want to. They're very committed to that narrative, and it's and the reality is it's not gone exactly like that. So
yeah, we should be more committed to the truth. That is what we should be committed to, even if the truth is tough and not what we want. That we should be committed to that. But
well, it's tough for Lockheed Martin, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's maybe that's what it boils down to.
Right,
just keeping it going, keep those dollars flowing.
Well, thank you, Kim. We appreciate that, and we'll be back with more Rising right after this.